Welcome to this discussion with the 2022 National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters. This is a conversation preceding the presentation of the awards at SF Jazz on March 31st. It is a great honor to welcome and congratulate these jazz masters, Cassandra Wilson, Donald Harrison, Billy Hart, Stanley Clarke. Great to have you all here. Thank you all for doing this. And let's get started a little bit around sort of how you all came to be. All of you had incredible teachers and mentors along the way. A lot of them were family members, and then it grew further. Billy, I'll put you on the spot first. But growing up in Washington, and it was your grandmother that sort of helped guide you through a neighbor towards how to be a drummer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another way was that my grandmother on my mother's side lived in an apartment complex across the street, across the hall from a great saxophone player that neither of us really knew that much about. But she was late coming home from, when I went to visit her, she was late coming home from work. So I had to stay in this saxophone player's house for a while. And that's how I began to learn about the music itself. And that's how it all started. This guy gave me a couple of Charlie Parker records when I was very young, and I was very influenced by those records. I still am.
And who was the gentleman?
His name was Roger Buck Hill. They now have I don't know what you call those huge photos that you have. That's the size of a whole building. But there's what's the word for that?
Mural.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that you, Donald?
No, it was Miss Wilson.
I know I have a deep voice, so it's okay.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a mural of Buck Hill in Washington, D.C. in the Northwest area as we speak. That's the size of a building. Just in case, the people that are that interested in who he is or was.
And did you get to work with Buck Hill?
Eventually, years later, I got a chance to, because I was, 13 or 14 years old when I first met him. But then years later, I was able to work with him and record with him, yeah.
Cassandra, your father was a musician, and that's kind of how you came to it, and eventually he guided you a bit, but you self-taught yourself, right? Guitar through method books and things like that.
Well, that was when I was 12, but I started taking piano lessons when I was 5 and a half. And you're right, my father was a musician. He played, started off on trumpet. No, actually started off on violin when he was very young in Chicago. And then moved to the trumpet. He was in the Army band. And from the trumpet, he went to the guitar. And his final instrument of choice was the bass. So when I was growing up, that was, those were the instruments that were in the home, were the bass, piano, and lots of guitars. But it was a singular study. I did not really learn about music with other people in a group until I joined the junior high marching band. And that was the first time that I experienced what it felt like to be surrounded with the sound of other musicians. And that's what I think woke me up. It really awakened me to the power of music. And from the band, I started playing, I had been playing guitar. and the guitar led to doing gigs with small groups. So it was fun.
As you got more interested in music, there were people in Jackson, Mississippi, where you were and are now. People like Alvin Fielder, the Black Arts Music Society, that really helped push you towards what you became, basically.
Yes. Well, yeah, my father always pushed jazz on me, from the time I was very small, because his favorite musician was Miles Davis. And he actually preferred Cannonball Adderley to Charlie Parker. Coming from Chicago, I don't know, I guess that's that sound, the soul sound was more important to him than the meticulousness of bebop. And so Alvin Fielder was the one who said, okay, you got to check out Charlie Parker. And that was the beginning of my journey into learning the language of bebop and mastering it. Not mastering it. I don't think you ever master it, but I was able to understand it and was able to speak it on the bandstand, which is very important, as a musician to have that kind of evolution, especially as a vocalist. To have that kind of a background was really very helpful when I finally ended up in New York City and started hanging out with the Cats.
Mm-hmm. And all of you made a journey to New York City at some point here. Stanley, you grew up in Philadelphia, and your aspiration also initially was classical music, right? You wanted to be bass player in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it was your mother, right, that was really encouraging you towards music.
Yeah. My mother was a kind of a semi-pro opera singer. And so when I was a young kid, I used to hear, I actually thought she was crazy because she was singing foreign languages around the house, singing in French and all that, German and Italian. But it was beautiful what she was doing, And, she used to grab me by the hand Saturday morning and take me to get music lessons. And I used to go to this place in Philadelphia called the Settlement Music School, which is a school that's been there for forever. You go up and and they had teachers from the Philly Orchestra, and some guys used to come down from the New York Philharmonic. So I had a very kind of a traditional education on the bass, but I lived 2 doors down from a saxophone player. When I was listening to Billy, I was sort of reminiscing like some of my experiences. I lived 2 doors down from was a saxophone player. I don't know, I sort of looked at him as an avant-garde saxophone player. His name was Bayard Lancaster.
Oh, yeah.
I was 2 doors down. So Bayard, I used to, I'd finish practicing at home. I'm like 13, 14. And I'd see him walking down the street with a saxophone in a strange outfit, just playing, screaming. And there was something about that. I guess it was the sense of freedom that I got from him so I started talking to him, and he gave me a great thing to look at as a kid, because I was, listening to music, all different types of music. I felt like I had to listen to classical music, but then I listened to, the other music that was on the radio. And then I would hear Bayard up the street with his bands. And I remember Bayard saying to me, he said, listen, you should just listen to music like you're looking at trees. You don't have to like it or dislike it, but you'll be a much richer person if you just listen. And then you can decide for yourself what you want to embrace. So later I played with, there was a club in Philadelphia called the Showboat. I'm sure you might have played there sometime. Yeah. Showboat. And so myself and a drummer, we were 16 years old, and Bayard put some glasses on us. This was my first gig. And I said, well, aren't we going to have some rehearsals? He says, no. When I go up on the stage, when I say start, you start. So went up on the stage, and I think the club owner knew we were young, and we went up there, but we had a lot of facility. And we played. That was my first thing, and and then I went from there on to other things, But But that initial sense of freedom, that's within jazz. There's structure in jazz music and all the various different languages within that, because it's jazz as years go by has become much more of an undefined term. So it's many things for different people. But for me, the thing that sort of the common denominator factor that goes through all of it is I guess I would call it the spirit of play, improvisation, and you have to have virtuosity, you have to have skill on your instrument, and as Cassandra said, you have to understand those languages. I mean, understanding bebop is is very important if you're going to step on the stage with bebop musicians. So yeah, so there's a lot of things, but that's the first thing that I think about in my early days.
Beautiful. Donald, so before we get on officially here, Cassandra addressed you as Big Chief, and Cassandra lived in New Orleans for a little while. That plays a lot into who you are and how you grew up and how you're coming from the city of the root of this music. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I won't say the root. I'll say it's a root contributor. Over the years, I've learned a lot. But yeah, Cassandra has actually been out walking with me, and actually, the way she was engaging me, I consider her a member of our group, because she was doing the things that other people do for the chief, and she knows what I'm talking about. I grew up in a city, and my experiences were from a cultural perspective before I was thinking about the music, because the music was just a part of the culture. When you go to what we call a second line, a traditional jazz parade, or a party where they're raising money with jazz music, because jazz started out as benevolent music. That's why New Orleans has benevolent societies, where the music was part of raising money to help people who didn't have a chance in life. But I grew up dancing to jazz, traditional jazz in New Orleans, and the music was just a part of that whole social economic way of looking at life, transcendence to a better place for your soul, and the life that we had to live in New Orleans, and the culture, the tribal culture, was connected to antiquity. And the old timers used to always say, this is our closest connection to where we came from in jazz and in the tribal culture. They would always say that. So I always thought of the music as connecting me to the people that I needed to know but could never know. The names of my families, which is something that as African Americans we never can have. You go back to the motherland, and these are my family members, and this is my great 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 grandfather. So we go back to the 1800s, but the music and the culture is always a connection that grounds me, and as a place of transcendence. So that's the way I've always looked at the music. But then you start learning how to play from various people, and I always say that when Charlie Parker said, "If you didn't live it, it ain't come out of your horn," was something that changed my life in high school. Because then I went out and played with every master of almost every style of music that I could, so that when I played, it would be true to his statement. I lived it, and they taught me how they put the music together. And then I just take it from there. Whatever talent I have and whatever experiences I have, I just put them all together.
But that initial experience, excuse me, Don, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your father is really what brought you through this. This Big Chief is not a casual term. It refers to this tradition in New Orleans, and you are part of that tradition. Your father was and brought you into that, of the Mardi Gras Indians, and an essential part.
I'm going to cut you off. I call it Afro New Orleans culture now,
Okay.
because we don't have to say Mardi Gras Indian no more.
Mm.
That was a period when we had to say that, so we don't have to say that anymore. Afro New Orleans culture. Go ahead. You can ask me the question now.
Well, the question is, what growing up in that, I mean, this is, you're describing the culture itself, but this is a rich tradition that not a lot of, Americans or people around the world are fully aware of, how significant that tradition was, what it grew out of. And, you talk quite eloquently about it, but, just to give a little context to people about, your exact experience growing up in that.
Well, that the culture in New Orleans comes out of Congo Square, and Congo Square, as most people know who really follow music, is one of the places where Africans were allowed to continue their culture. If you were Yoruba, then you can continue your culture with the people of your ethnicity in Congo Square. So all of this culture from Africa was taking place in Congo Square, and then they started melding the concepts together. And if you listen, when I listen to records from the early 20s, I hear the direct link of the music from Congo Square that I learned inside of the culture, inside of jazz music. So I'm fortunate to know how all of things are put together, and where certain things came from in Africa, and how it was used in America, and how we use it today, how it's still part of the music that we play. So I feel like a missing link sometimes because I have, the cultural side and the musical side from modern jazz all the way back to, I guess, antiquity. That whole schematic. I see music as the whole picture.
Billy, back to you for a second here in Washington. So a lot of the musicians that came out of the South and being in Washington, you were kind of right at the line between North and South here, and you grew up playing all kinds of music. But there was another Washington, D.C. Resident that you cite in sources as your mentor, Shirley Horn. Can you talk a little bit about your time with her and how she influenced you?
Well, she continues to be a great influence because she was also she was a great vocalist, incredible vocalist, but she was an incredible musician also. I mean, she not that if you can't be both. I mean, she is both as far as I'm concerned, and still she inspires me to this moment. She I mean, I played with her as if she was one of the great pianists of all time. And I played with her when she was one of the greatest vocalists of all time. And so that was a huge, huge lesson in melodies and the theories of music and things like that. Plus, she knew people. I mean, she knew Sarah Vaughan. She knew names I can't even think of right now. But I mean, she knew Billie Holiday. She knew Nat King Cole. She knew Miles Davis, and we all came up with Jimmy Cobb and Frank West, and we all knew the history of Duke Ellington and all that as Washington D.C. Culture. So that I could go on and on if I could remember everybody's name. But that's what she gave me.
Yeah.
Continues to give me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of you talk about particular influences. Cassandra, you talk about Miles. Stanley. Your Donald. Coming to New York. Art Blakey. A lot of it is around the times that all of you kind of ended up in New York initially, and the people you work with, and Stanley, if I just jump to you for a second about getting to meet Chick and how that relationship began and what it was like to be in New York, that idea where everything was happening and this was a place where everyone who wanted to be anything in jazz ended up.
I met Chick. Actually, at the time, I was playing with the great saxophonist Joe Henderson, and we were playing, oddly enough, in my hometown, Philadelphia. We were playing a club called the Blue Horizon. And I think one of the nights the piano player couldn't make it. And so Joe said, I'm bringing this guy down from New York. His name is Chick Corea. I'd heard of him, heard he played with Miles. He might have had a record out or something. And so Chick came in and we played. It's funny, every now and then, we as musicians will meet someone that's like, for some reason, there's a kind of almost a supernatural connection. In the case of a bass player and a piano player, like just wherever he went harmonically, I was there. Wherever I went, he was there. And it was different than just people playing together and you're playing a chart and everyone's following. Because we can do that, but there's in other higher, I guess I call it higher level improvisational music, where you must move. You have to sort of be in communication with the other person, not just eye contact. There has to be a language connection. And for some reason, I don't know why. I don't even think I want to know why, but it's, we just always had that connection. So, so it actually turned out, I think he came down on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night. And so I forget who the piano player was. He got sick. So Chick spent the whole week down there. And I was living in a small apartment downtown Philadelphia. And so, we were hanging out one night and he said, yeah, I really love this tune. My favorite Coltrane song was this tune called The Wise One on the Crescent album. And I said, well, that's my favorite tune. So we listened to that tune. And it's funny, in that one night, we kind of sketched out the band that we actually eventually put together. Was Return to Forever and everything that we were going to do. It's really nice, when if you have to be so fortunate to meet someone that's like a soulmate musically. So, we did a lot of things, a lot of records, played a lot of music, did a lot of things, but it all started that little spark on the stage playing Shade of Jade with Joe Henderson. It was real fast and we were going, C minor and some other things. And it was great. I always thank Joe, thanks for bringing Chick down. That was great.
Yeah, part of the jazz, improvisation of these happenings that go, but people seem to be connectors in jazz. Blakey, Donald worked with, being one of them, Miles obviously being a big one, and Cassandra's hero of Miles. But when you came to New York, Cassandra, you got involved in a scene too with Steve Coleman and M-Bass, out of a tradition again of Black musicians really trying to have more say over their own music. And what was that experience like? You came right from New Orleans, actually, and that was the time where you really wanted to exert your own voice as a musician in all ways, not just your physical voice. So tell us a little bit about that how that happened with New York and musicians like Jerry Allen. What a great group of musicians that was. And Billy was involved in that as well too. I don't know if you crossed paths in that era.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was the time when we were all going down to 7th Avenue and to Sweet Basil's, the Vanguard, and of course that's where I would see Billy Hart playing. And we were, I guess, we were a ragtag group of musicians that were kind of bucking the system because we weren't included in that young lion world, right? And so the reason that I decided to hang out with the M-Bass crowd, people like Steve Coleman and Jerry Allen and Terry Lynn Carrington, was because there was a place for a vocalist. The more neo-traditional cats would not really, they didn't really deal with singers very much. So since they didn't know that I was also a musician, they didn't really invite me. They didn't invite me to play in their reindeer games. I was like the red nose, but I enjoyed the camaraderie with the M-Bass crowd because it was an exciting time. We were creating a new language. We were creating new ways to communicate with one another. It's an extension of the tradition, but it's something that we could make our own because I believe the tradition is always about plus one, which is that comes from an ancient Yoruba spiritual system, plus one meaning we are always adding to the tradition. We can't just linger in the tradition and Xerox it. There always has to be some people, not everyone, but some people who are constantly gathering new information to bring to the language. So, M-Bass, yeah.
All of you have been very comfortable doing various things. Cassandra, I mean, as you were talking about, being, an answer to Young Lions, you eventually did work with, sort of the leader of that on Blood in the Fields with Wynton Marsalis and performing around that too. And it's just sort of always amazing to watch how, the art, the music itself pulls all these people together in various different ways and how related all these different musics are. Stanley, you went in this what people call a fusion direction and whatever it is, but I'm sure to you it just felt like an organic thing to do. And I could be wrong, but growing from what you did with Chicken Return to Forever and your own career from that, your own solo career.
I to be quite honest, I never really looked at myself as a genre bass player, like a classical bass player, jazz bass player, rock, whatever. I mean, and I'm comfortable in all those different languages, but I studied the bass, I studied really hard on the acoustic bass, and as you mentioned earlier, I was, going to audition for the Philadelphia Orchestra, but Chick Corea came down and saved me from that. He said, "You're not going to like bow ties," I said, "Oh, okay." So, and then later, I picked up the electric bass for fun. I didn't really like it that much at first, but I picked it up for fun, and then as a composer, I started writing music for the electric bass that was a little different at the time when I started making my earlier records. There really weren't any electric bass players out there with like solo records, and so I wrote music, and then it kind of people liked it. I said, "Wow, this must be maybe this is a serious thing." Because it's funny, at that time you couldn't actually go to a school, a music school, as an electric bass player, and there weren't that many books. There was really hardly anything in education. You just kind of pick the instrument up. But now every major college that gives music, you could go as an electric bass player and graduate, and that's an amazing thing, But again, I played with a lot of different people, and when I was in New York, I played in did a lot of recording sessions. So I never really attached a genre. Like, I'm a jazz bass player. I can play jazz, but I can also do many other things too. So I'm really comfortable with that.
Donald, when you came to New York, Art Blakey was sort of a lot of that reason. You came with Terrence Blanchard and joined the Blakey band. And Cassandra was talking earlier about this, all the different things going on in New York, the idea that there was a movement that was a Young Lions movement, a traditionalist, a neo-traditionalist movement, and different ideas, how did you think it fit with your experience in the Blakey band? And these were seminal experiences for all of you, working with certain band leaders or leading certain bands that a lot of, that really have pushed this art form forward. Blakey's band being one of the greatest kind of factories, almost, for amazing musicians for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I got to New York, I wanted to really play with the people who played with Charlie Parker. He was my hero. And one of the great sadnesses of my life is I never got to see Charlie Parker play. But I had to accept that. But I knew I could play with the people who played with him. And if I asked a lot of questions, maybe they would tell me what he told them and how they put the music together with him. And that's what I started doing. I started with Roy Haynes. And started asking him a million questions about Bird and the music they played called bebop. And I stayed with him 15 years, over 15 years. He helped me put some of those things together. And same thing with Art Blakey, Miles Davis, all those guys Walter Bishop, I could go down the line. But my heroes were also people like Stanley Clarke and Quincy Jones, Herbie Hancock, because I grew up, dancing to contemporary music in the clubs with my peers, and I didn't think anything was wrong with the music that I grew up with. And when hip hop came along, I loved that too. So I really loved musicians who loved music, and as Mr. Clarke, beyond categories, who just loved music. And here's an interesting story. Talking about Art Blakey, I did what they call smooth jazz record, but I call it instrumental pop. And before I did it, some of the guys were telling me I was selling out. So then I said, let me ask Art Blakey. I said, Art, I want to make a commercial record of what they call in commercial music, but I just like the kind of music. It feels good to me. And with electronic instruments. And he said, yeah, but you're supposed to do that. Don't listen to anybody. Because if you have the talent to do it, you're supposed to pursue it. You don't know where it's going to lead you. So then I made the record. And then it led me to see that I could add all these elements of modern music into acoustic jazz. And that's when I came up with that sound that they call Nouveau Swing, with influences of all the contemporary dance music that I grew up inside the music: funk, hip hop, soul music, New Orleans music. All that stuff got mixed up in the jazz. But if I hadn't listened to Art Blakey saying, you got to pursue what's natural for you, not what's natural for other people, I wouldn't have done it. So that's why I have so much respect for guys who do what they want to do with the music and just are positive. One thing I can say about Charlie Parker, I've read a lot of interviews. I never heard him put down another musician. I really found that quite remarkable, and I wanted to be like that.
Cassandra, I mean, all of you have these amazing careers in which you create this concept of following your own muse. Art Blakey's directive here. Do things that are true to yourself. And Cassandra, as you moved to your career at Blue Note, was really you really invented a new kind of vocal tradition here, and weren't afraid to mix. Or not, it probably wasn't a question of fear. It was just, it was natural to you to combine, country elements and blues elements in with jazz elements quite naturally, and evolving your own music around that as well, too.
Yes, but here's the thing. It's interesting. My father was the one who introduced me to Stanley Clarke. Now, my father is, I'm sure, he's much older than Mr. Clarke, but he was always open to listening to what the younger electric because he played electric bass. What the younger bassists were doing with the music. And so I'm growing up, or at the time I'm, starting to go out and play gigs, and he's listening to this music, and it made a huge impression on me. He really believed in the development of the individual voice. And we're always balancing the individual voice with the voice of the group. And that's the beauty of what we do, is that we can do that. We can balance that. But as Big Chief was saying, the most important thing is to follow what happens here in the heart, because it will never lead you astray. And so I grew up playing guitar, folk music, blues, and I have great respect for the blues masters from my home state. And so why not go there?
Billy, you have a great quote from Miles about, I think it's for you, from Miles, about just offhanded comments you would hear from him, and the most unexpected. He wasn't an overt teacher, but he would drop a moment of wisdom, move along. And everyone that I've come across in my career who's worked with him just has this indelible kind of mark on them of that influence. I think your story had to do with walking down a hall and start on 4, I think is how it started, and go from there, kind of thing. But the way he totally followed his own, this idea that everyone is all here talking about following their own muse, that's what he was encouraging, basically.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess so. I think Miles was a great teacher because he had been such a great student. I mean, he had such great teachers, But yeah, and when he said, I don't start everything on 4, I just thought he was showing me in another way about the concept of clave. That's the way I took it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And Cassandra, what was it about Miles that you took to be so inspirational? I mean, it's obvious what a great artist he was, but were there particular things that resonated with you?
Well, I guess I heard sketches of Spain when I was 6 years old, right? 5 years old. And it just blew my mind. That album blew my mind because it was so different from the rest of the albums in my father's library. And so I would listen to it and just try to figure out what is he doing? And how is that related to the rest of the music that, my daddy was listening to? And it just intrigued me, the fact that there was here, and I knew this at that age, that here you have a musician who is actually exploring a totally different way of expressing his art form. He's inside of one context, but he's not afraid to experiment with another. And it just blew my mind. And from that point on, I just followed whatever he did and listened to whatever he did, because there was always a lesson there, I think, in listening to all of the stages of Miles Davis's music. And what are we talking about? 5 decades? 5 decades of influencing music. That can't be denied.
Yeah. I want to bring up something. Miles there's a lot of things written about Miles, but very little is written about Miles, how he influenced people, because he wasn't like a traditional teacher or, teaching at some school or whatever. And I'm not sure whether he ever gave anybody a music lesson, but, Miles, I mean, I remember one time me and Lenny White went because Lenny introduced me to Miles Davis. Miles wanted me to play in his band, but I had some other stuff I had to do. And I went to see Miles at his place in New York. And one of the things he said to me was, you know what? You should play solo bass. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. This was early 70s. I had some records out, but I didn't. Sometimes when Miles would say things like, as Billy was saying, the way his phrasing was, because he spoke like fragmentally, so yeah, solo bass, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But years later, I played 2 gigs with, I opened up to his band and solo bass. He wanted me to play solo bass in Chicago, and I think it was Hawaii somewhere, and I just came on with a bass and I played it, and he was standing on the side of the stage, so it was something that he saw. Obviously that communication came to me, and I have to give him credit for that. Maybe not 100%, but the point that I'm making is that Miles was such an influential musician or character, man, whatever. He could have not played trumpet and said that, because he saw things. He wasn't afraid to try new things. He liked all things, all the times I was with him, all types of music. It was amazing. It would really be nice if someone wrote about that and, about Miles, because that's never touched on enough.
I have some things I'd like to elaborate on about my association with Miles. I remember first time he called me on the phone. He said, "You that little skinny dude who plays with Art Blakey?" I couldn't believe it was Miles Davis. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, come by the house," and then I began the journey with him, playing with him briefly, but also just being able to talk to him all the time about music. But I remember a few times I went to his house, and I was watching him work. And it changed my perception of work ethic. This guy, as you know, Miles was a painter. He was into world events. But I'll just elaborate on one time I went to his house, and he was writing a song on the piano, on the keyboard, and he would do that for about 5 or 10 minutes. Then he would go to a painting, and he would paint on the painting for a few minutes. He was watching Round Midnight on the TV. He was holding a conversation with me about all of those the things that he was doing, and he was reading the newspaper, ordering food, and he was doing all of these things at one time. And I was watching, everything was moving forward. His mind was he was thinking of so many things that he was moving all of these things forward. He was asking me about cars. What do you think about these cars? That's nice. I was like, yeah, everything you played is nice. But it showed me that a person who worked as hard as him, why he achieved so much. So many lessons. I remember he said, when you listen to something and you like a phrase, turn it around and make it your own. So then I remember I love this phrase. Immediately after he told me that John Coltrane, shadowy, which is a whole tone, it's a double diminished. But Train was playing on the whole steps, and I looked at it and I said, "Oh, I could play off the half steps." So I turned it around. It sort of sounds like it, but it's not. Then I said, "Well, if there's whole steps and half steps, I can do one part of it where it's a whole step and a half step, and a whole step and a half step, or I can do a half step and a whole step." So he changed my way of looking at music. So now I'm taking all these things, looking at Bird and turning it around to something else. Taking a Bird, his interpolations. He was doing most of his interpolations are based on an arpeggio. So I said, let's do the interpolations based on a scale or on fourths. So you changes the whole sound of the music, but it's still based off the firmament of the ideas that came before you. So that just one huge thing that Miles said that changed the way I look at music forever.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
So all of you are still incredibly active, musicians, and still creating. And, as and surrounding yourselves with different musicians and things, and what things are getting you excited about how the direction of things move within your own bands, or what you're hearing, moving forward. Bill, you've had a long history teaching. You've got a lot to see as you, Donald, as well too. And where do you see the evolution, or of this music moving, and things that might excite you right now?
Are you asking me?
All of you, all four of you.
After you, Donald.
I think it's an exciting time. I'm the musicians who hang out with me. We study as much music as we can, and one thing Art Blakey used to say: "A fair exchange is no robbery." So they teach me the things that they're into, and then I try to pass down what I learned from all the great people I've been around. So we learn both ways. But there's other guys with other ideas, and I agree. What Mr. Clark said earlier, that you just look at the tree, just look at what they're doing. You might, most of the time, you will find something that you like that they're doing, and you can incorporate a little bit of what these younger musicians are doing, because they have different ideas, some of them, and I applaud them for what they're doing, because they work hard on it. But there's also traditionalists and people who think like young people who think like us.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of different ways of looking at music, and all of them are valid. So we just have to see where they go with it. I mean, some of them are already doing unique things and taking it to new frontiers. That's the nature of time,
Mm.
Just talk about the hip hop world. There's a new thing called trap or drill music that the old hip hoppers don't like, but I love it, and because they changed the sound of what they were doing. Hip hop has changed and evolved since it started in the late 70s, 79. I remember when a hip hop, hippie doppy deep, when the Sugar Hill gang came out, and now it's a whole different thing. The singing in popular music has changed so much, but it's all good. It's moved from the concept of Mahalia Jackson and Aretha Franklin taking. They have a whole nother thing going on now, and the same thing is going with jazz. But there's still people who think like us, and it's also beautiful. All of these concepts live side by side, hopefully gloriously.
Mm.
And in terms of rhythm, as and me being some kind of instructor, everything that I think of as being or beginning to state new forms is really, and the newer it is, it turns out to be the older that it is. And less like a lot of the things I think in terms of breaking ground rhythmically, improvisationally anyway, is we find out that it's ancient. We're rediscovering interesting music.
Mhm.
That's the way it looks to me.
Well said. Can I jump on that? Okay, here's what I'm doing. The birds I'm listening to down here in Mississippi are remarkable. Well, of course, we have the mockingbird, right? Who never repeats. A mockingbird can sing for like, I don't know, 5 minutes. They have them down in New Orleans too. All in this region, we have the mockingbird. They sing for so long, it's impossible to mock them. But they've taken everybody's song and created their own song that lasts much longer. That's fascinating to me. the rhythms in nature are also fascinating. And what Billy was saying about rediscovering something that may be ancient. When you listen to nature, you hear all these wild rhythms. And it kind of reminds me of the gamelan orchestras, in Indonesia. It seems as if their rhythms are based on what the insects, birds, everybody's doing in nature. So, okay, I know y'all think I'm crazy. But the birds are not singing A equals 440. What are they singing? What is your natural A? That's what I think about a lot of.
Can I comment on that? I think it's beautiful.
Crazy calls me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's not much I can add to that. I mean, the most important thing to me in society is that, that there's a high degree of artistic freedom, and that allows people to create and change things. I mean, what we do and what we have done and what we will do as artists is we change. And sometimes we land on things that are great, like you land on a Charlie Parker or John Coltrane, or going way back, some of the great classical composers. And I think, as long as, we're not, just people in general are not suppressed or minimized where you cannot create art, like for some reason this country turned into something much different where you couldn't create or you couldn't do this. As long as that precious ability to communicate is there, we're in good hands. I mean, it's this planet at times appears like it's not as spiritual as it should be, or it's way too lawless. And, but there's pockets of beauty around, and the truth. One of those small pockets is us. We're sitting here, we create. There's a lot of other people that create. And as long as that's happening, as long as we can create, and as Cassandra was saying, there's information out there, there's things. This actually is really a beautiful planet to live on. There's beautiful things to see. And you look at that and you open your heart, you can see things that will inspire you to do that. And as long as that's there, we're cool. It's all good.
Well, that is all inspiring, and you are inspirations. I want to congratulate you all again. Thank you for participating. But Cassandra Wilson, Billy Hart, Stanley Clark, Donald Harrison, our 2022 National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters, our nation's highest award, deservedly going to you four. And congrats and thank you again. And we'll see you soon.
All right.
And don't forget the ceremony coming up on March 31st here in San Francisco at SF Jazz. All right. Peace.
Great to see all of you.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to congratulate every one of you also, which I would have wanted to do even if there wasn't an award. I've always felt that way about all of you anyway.
Well, Bill, I feel like you every night. What I tell you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank all of you guys.
All right.
And thank you for when I was coming up in the late 70s, listening to School Days every day with my compatriots.
You know what I'm talking about?
All the other great music that you've done, Mr. Clark, and all the great. Cassandra, I I'll tell you it's Cassandra Wilson Day at my house. We listen to you.
How about Blue Skies?
Oh, wow.
Y'all know how much we love each other. So thank y'all for what you're doing, enhancing the universe with your talent.
All right. Thank you.